Dr. Ron Wyatt. So,
Oh no. Is this photo for real? Is this
okay.
photo for real? Does this actually come from them? I'm asking the question.
I think you're
Uh
jealous.
you think I'm jealous? Is that a bathtub in the middle of the desert? All right. The text does not say anywhere that the rock was split. This is pareidolia. I see nothing. I see a white circle and a dot. No, it's not the real Mount Sinai.
At least he didn't lie about his name. Maybe.
Yeah, at least he didn't lie about his name as far as we know.
Hey guys, welcome to Anti Podcast. My name is Nemanja Jurisic, and today we have the best guest ever, Dr. David Falk. Dr. Falk, how are you?
Flattered. That's how I am. Best guest ever. Wow. I don't think anyone's ever said that before.
Just to know, BTAC was previous, so still best. So okay.
Wow. Well, that's high praise.
Okay, I'll introduce my guest. Dr. David Falk is independent researcher, and he have 4 graduate degrees, PhD in Egyptology at the University of Liverpool under Kenneth Kitchen and Steve Collier, and 3 master degrees. I don't know the name of them, so he also wrote a book, The Ark of the Covenant, in its Egyptian context. And if I'm correct, you're writing another book about, if I'm correct, Ipuwer Papyrus?
No, I'm on the plagues of the Exodus.
Okay.
Plagues of the Exodus.
Okay. Today we are going to talk about Dr. Ron Wyatt. So,
oh no.
No, I'm kidding. In our country, Serbia, he is the legend. He's GOAT, the best archaeologist ever. So we are in problem.
We're in trouble.
Yeah.
We're in trouble.
I was searching for someone who is expert, and second, who is not from Serbia, so they cannot pick up stones. So you have both. Well, I will share screen, and we can start about questions. Do you see my presentation?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Can you describe who is Ron Wyatt and what he did and what he found and similar?
Okay. He's a nurse. He was a nurse anesthesiologist. He was more of an adventurer. He wasn't really an archaeologist. Archaeologists dig, recover, and report stuff. He's more of a, how would I say this, an adventurer, an explorer. And he did his work from 1977 until roughly 1999 when he died. It's hard to sugarcoat this. He had claimed to have received messages from God, angelic visions. They were men in black suits that visited his site. You know, it was pretty conspiratorial, some really off the wall stuff. He claimed to make probably every major find in the Bible. You know, he claimed to find Noah's Ark, the Sodom and Gomorrah, the tomb of Noah, the house of Noah, the Ark of the Covenant, the Red Sea crossing, you name it, he claimed to have found it. So, you know, if his claims were true, he's probably the most touched man of God since Moses. So, you know, the claims were outlandish. The claims were just plain outlandish. And I think probably the most disturbing thing about him is his false gospel. He claimed that to be saved, you had to obey the 10 Commandments. So he was a Judaizer. So that's probably the most disturbing claim he made. He also made claims about, say, the blood of Jesus Christ being only 24 chromosomes when the normal human has 46. And this would violate the idea that Christ was fully God and fully man, because he wouldn't be fully man if he had 23 chromosomes. So, and the fact is, modern archaeologists have always, repudiated his claims. Okay, there's no modern archaeologist today that accepts any of his claims. Yet, and frankly, before he was very popular in the 1980s and 1990s. And then he sort of drifted into obscurity until this thing called the internet came around. And with the internet, he has found a new audience and a new generation of people who basically hold to what he says. And he's now got a larger following now than he's ever had. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. We can go next. Is this Noah's Ark? You don't have to explain every detail, but just brief.
Okay. This is the Jurunapar site, and it was named after a Turkish military officer who discovered it in 1960. And he was actually the first person to claim that this was the site of Noah's Ark. So Ron Wyatt didn't discover this site. He just popularized it. Okay. Now, what made it so popular was the fact that it has a length that's roughly equivalent to the measurement of Noah's Ark, even though it is much wider. Now, the principal problem with the site is that the quote walls of this quote boat are actually mud. It's a mud flow. And the walls are actually a composite of mud and basalt boulders. Now, Wyatt claimed that these were actually petrified wood. No petrified wood has been found at the site. And we have found animal remains, like bits of antler, hair, cropulites, which are fossilized dung. But all of this has been found inside these mud walls. So this couldn't have been timbers originally. Now, this has been examined by many experts. All of them universally agree that this is not a petrified wood and was never a boat. What's also interesting is we find other mud flows like this in the area, just much smaller. So this is not a unique formation to the area. We find several of these. This is just simply the largest one.
Okay,
I'm good.
This makes sense. Next question. Is this biblical Sodom?
Well, if it is, it's in the wrong place. Because one of the things is during the War of Kings, when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah come out to fight, they're fighting against a Mesopotamian coalition that's coming from Gaza, headed east towards Sodom. And during the battle, the kings and the soldiers flee to the tar pits and get stuck in the tar pits. We know where those tar pits are. They're in Jordan. They're on the east side of the Jordan, kind of midway between the north point and the south point of the Dead Sea. Okay. Riot Sodom is on the west side of the Dead Sea. It's not on the east side, it's on the west side. And it's actually very close to Masada. There's no tar pits near Masada. That's a showstopper. That's a showstopper right there. So it's in the wrong place. It's, first of all, completely in the wrong place. The second thing is that the quote sulfur ball nodules that they found in the area are common in the area in general because the soil has a high sulfur content, and the compounds in the soil bioreact with the bacteria there that creates these sulfur nodules. There's no evidence that these modules were made from a thermal process. Mm-hmm. The other issue here is that the quote walls of Sodom that he found are actually natural limestone formations that have been worn away by erosion. There's no evidence that people built these walls. And as such, there's also no evidence that they were destroyed by fire here. It's just limestone formations.
Okay, someone said that this sulfur is so clean that we don't find this anywhere on planet. Is this true?
No. Well, here's the thing, there's more than one way to make pure sulfur. It can be the result of volcanic processes. Mm-hmm. Okay. But it can also be the result of bioreactive processes. And you can make sulfur just as clean as that way. So, it's one of those things where it just is the conditions of the area that's going to give you the results of purification, not necessarily through any thermal process necessarily. Mm-hmm. Now, we also have to qualify the quote purity aspect of this too. These are not 99% pure. These are like in the 80s. They contain large amounts of the carbonates found in the area. Mm-hmm. So they contain usually on minimum 15 to 20% carbonates. If it contains that many carbonates, it couldn't be a thermal process. Mm-hmm. Because the sulfur would just leach out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's go next. This is the best. I don't know how to.
Is this photo for real? Is this photo for real? Does this actually come from them? I'm asking the question.
Yeah.
Oh my God. This is a laughable forgery.
I think you're jealous.
You think I'm jealous? Okay. This looks like a plywood mock-up that was used in some church play. I mean, really, some kid's church play. That's what this looks like. How do I explain this? Israelites who made the Ark of the Covenant were among the finest craftsmen of the late Bronze Age. The Bible tells us that they were trained in all the wisdom and crafts of Egypt. You look at 18th dynasty Egyptian ritual furniture, and it's magnificent. It's highly detailed, highly articulated. It is the finest craftsmanship ever made by basically any jeweler or carpenter. The craftsmanship is on a level that's par excellence. And if you want to see examples from the 18th dynasty that are roughly contemporary with the Exodus, all you need to do is look at the treasures of King Tutankhamun. Incredibly elaborate works of the same type of construction, which is metal overlaid over wood, same as the Ark of the Covenant. This is not representative of that craftsmanship. This is a bad forgery. And frankly, Ron Wyatt had been known for bad forgeries. He would do this on occasion where he would plant evidence, like he would plant chariot wheels. He would plant fake walls. And he would do this to keep his marks on the hook. Basically, con men do this. Basically, they feed you a little bit to keep you paying out money.
Mm-hmm.
And one way to do this is to give them a little bit of evidence and then just take it away. It'd say, oh, we found a wall, but that's not the wall we're looking for. We found a door, but that's not the door we're looking for. We found the ark, but we can't go in there. It's a rug pull. It's a rug pull. You basically get them on the rug and then you pull the rug out from under them. I mean, this is just so fraudulent. It's as I said, it looks like a church play mock-up. And those cherubim look like they've been made out of tinfoil.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing even serious about this forgery.
So did he have mental illness?
I would say not. I would say he was a liar.
Liar. Okay.
Okay, here's the reason. And all this is documented in Mary Irwin's book. So I'm not saying anything that hasn't already been published.
Mm-hmm.
Ron Wyatt, one of his benefactors, basically started getting suspicious. And Ron Wyatt came to him and asked for more money. And he said, okay, you can have more money. I just want you to take a polygraph test. Now, okay, we all know that polygraph tests are inherently unreliable in some situations. For example, in criminal defenses. But they are still used today
mm-hmm.
because they do have an application where they are applicable. If you can give very, very specific questions to basically yes or no kind of questions, and you can basically nail down the questions to very specific things, they're still used in private investigations. They're still used actually even by the FBI under certain circumstances. So they're not completely invalid, but they cannot be used in a criminal court. Ron Wyatt, when he took his polygraph, where he was asked about all his specific discoveries, failed every question except his name. It was a pretty damning result. It was a pretty damning result. Now, here's the thing. If he was mentally ill, mental illness can throw off a polygraph
mm-hmm.
because you believe what you say is true. People with mental illness or people who are delusional don't know that they're lying.
Yeah.
So they pass polygraphs with flying colors. Or they have paranoid delusions, in which case they'll fail outright. But either way, in the case of, say, Ron Wyatt, who, he might have been a fantasist, but he certainly knew he wasn't telling the truth. So I used to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I used to say, okay, maybe he had a mental illness, or maybe he lied so much that he believed it. I'm no longer of that persuasion. I think now that he was just a charlatan and a liar and a con man, especially given the fact that he would con not just individuals, but say businesses repeatedly for money. Like, for example, he repeatedly bilked 3 ABN out of tens of thousands of dollars. That's not the act of somebody who's just mentally ill. That's the act of somebody who is committing a fraud. Like, for example, one of the things that 3ABM asked, because, hey, Ron Wyatt, I want to show me the post hole. Because at the site of the supposed crucifixion, because they were coming out with that. They were coming out with nothing on their Ark of the Covenant special here. And Ron Wyatt had promised 3ABN exclusive access to the site. and had at the same time invited Trinity Broadcast Network there, who was also filming. And they said, okay, you've given Trinity Broadcast Network access to, say, the post holes. We want to film that at least. We want to get something out of this. And Ron Wyatt said, oh, they stole the full post holes. Okay. I know it sounds ridiculous. It sounds ridiculous, but that's sort of the level of some of the lies that Ron Wyatt perpetuated.
Mm-hmm. At least he didn't lie about his name, maybe.
Yeah, at least he didn't lie about his name as far as we know. But he also had a lot of brothers and sisters too, so he couldn't actually lie about his name.
Okay, let's begin with main theme. Is this Exodus route from Egypt and Red Sea or Red Sea crossing site?
No, and this is also another discovery that Ron Wyatt didn't discover but popularized. Mm-hmm. It was first suggested by I think it was Parker in the 19th century. I think he was the first guy who proposed this site. So this is not a new discovery. This is, again, something that Wyatt popularized. Now, how do I say this? If this is true, then it completely contradicts the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
It completely contradicts the Bible. Now, the fact is that we are told in Exodus 3:1 that Mount Sinai, also known as Mount Horeb, is west of the wilderness of Midian. The wilderness of Midian is on the east coast of the Sinai. And that's because during the late Bronze Age, Midian extended from Saudi Arabia all the way down into Edom, down into the eastern Sinai. And that would have been what was called the wilderness of Midian. So Moses would have had to gone west of that to get to Mount Sinai. So he would have had to be west of Nueba to be at Mount Sinai, if the Bible's true. But that's not all. The Bible also says that the Red Sea is really, really close to Pithom, Baal-Zephon, and Pihahirot, and Migdol. It's sort of in the triangulation of those four places. We know where those, at least two of those places are according to Egyptian records. And they are in the northwest Sinai. In fact, on this map, the place of Sukkot is wrong. It should be in the delta, not outside the delta.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
So the fact is that the Sea of Reeds, the Yam Suf, has to be in the northwest Sinai because Egyptian records tell us it is. In fact, we even find the Yam Suf mentioned in Egyptian records. And it's north of Paramses and south of Charu. And Charu is at that sort of almost at that tip where the delta meets the desert on the east there. So it's got to be south of that and north of Paramses. And north Paramses is in the delta. So that's where the Yam Suf is. We find it mentioned in the Onomastica of Onomope. We find it mentioned in the Papyrus Anastasi 3. These are well-known places in Egyptian geography. Pithom's well-known. It's at Tel El Rataba, again in the Wadi Tumilat in the delta. Migdol is against the coast of the Mediterranean. So the Red Sea has to be in northwest Sinai. There's really no other option. And that makes it also consistent with the biblical record too. Whereas Wyatt's Red Sea and Mount Sinai are not consistent with the biblical revelation.
So Gulf of Aqaba cannot be Yam Suf.
No, it can't be. And it can't be for other reasons too. I mean, that's not the only reasons why. The other reason is because the biblical revelation also tells us that a wind from the east came and divided the waters. Okay? Those waters, this is a common phenomenon called a wind set down, where a wind blows and actually parts the waters. Quite literally, as it said, the wind sets down upon the waters and spreads them apart. We do find this. This is a observed phenomenon in Egypt. However, the wind has to be more powerful the deeper the water. Okay. Now, if the water is about 40 feet deep, like we find in the Eastern Delta, you only need a wind of about 50 miles an hour. You can walk through that. It's a strong wind, but you can walk through that. In the case of, say, the Nuiba crossing, where the water is 800 meters deep, you would need a wind of about 3,000 miles an hour. There is no wind in this solar system that's 3,000 miles an hour.
I get it.
And then you'd have other problems, such as that wind picking up the sand and ripping all the flesh off your skin. You don't have to, I mean, you don't have to drown Pharaoh's army. You can just blow them away.
Okay, I just hope that there are no other problems too. That this is end.
Well, I mean, even the whole idea of their virtual sand bridge is idiotic.
Oh.
There's no sand bridge under the water there.
Mm-hmm.
There's no sand bridge. And the topography underneath there is actually a mountain range. As I said, it goes down 800 meters. It's 2,400 feet and then comes back up again. There's no bridge under there. The UK chart Admiralty is responsible for the mapping of the undersea of that region. There's no bridge under there. It's just a mountain range. It's a down and then a mountain range and then up again. Can you imagine little old ladies taking their sheep down, doing a mountain climb down and doing them right back up again?
Well, God can do anything, so...
while a 3,000 mile an hour wind is blowing? The fact is that the biblical revelation tells that God used a natural means to divide the waters. And if you don't accept the biblical revelation here, you have to pile miracle upon miracle upon miracle upon miracle upon miracle to make it all work. And that's not part of God's providence. Yes, God will perform miracles. Absolutely, God will perform miracles. But God will also get you into a place where the timing of those miracles requires the least intervention.
Yeah, this is great. It makes sense. And let's move on. Are those Egyptian chariot wheels? We can check some photos. This is Egyptian, I believe.
Yeah, that one's Egyptian. That's a forgery. No, I mean, let's look at this one here. This one is a complete forgery. I know this is, the other ones are basically, the coral formations are dodgy. They're really, really dodgy. And nobody has taken those coral formations and actually brought them up and excavated them and said, hey, I found a chariot under that coral. Okay. That's a natural forming coral that looks like that. This, however, is a forgery. And this is one of Wyatt's forgeries. No chariot wheel ever looked like this in all of Egyptian history. Okay. Now, this is the color's kind of bleached here. It's usually shown as a gold color. So it's supposed to be completely covered in gold. Now, that axle assembly is probably the one thing that really gives it away as a complete forgery. No Egyptian axle assembly ever looked like this. If you go back to the previous picture, you'll see that the axle assembly is a long tube That's part of the wheel itself. And that's because the axle has to pass through that tube to keep the wheel from wobbling. Have you ever had like put a wheel on like a pencil and spun it around, and then as it stops, it goes blah 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 blah. It starts wiggling. That's what would happen with a wheel like this, because they compensated that with that long axle assembly, that tube, so the tube rests on the axle to keep it from wobbling. There's no axle assembly here. Mm-hmm. Furthermore, wheels are the result of bow making technology. So what they would do is they would make that axle assembly and have basically like ferrules on a paintbrush. I'm going to hold up a paintbrush here. Okay, this is a paintbrush. You'll notice here that there's a ferrule right here. That's the ferrule that holds the Brussels in there. Well, there'd be ferrules on the axle assembly to hold the spokes in place. Mm-hmm. Okay. They didn't slot into a solid chunk of wood like this here. This here is basically a cylinder, big, thick cylinder, where the axles are chunked in, are basically slotted in. That's not how they built chariots. The reason why they built chariots with ferrules is they would take laminated wood and stretch it around the axles, and they'd be held in by tension. This is not how this particular chariot wheel was assembled. This one here is essentially a big, thick rim. The Egyptians never made like this. Again, this is a solid piece of wood that's being shown here, not laminated wood that's been stretched. You can also tell it's a forgery too, is because the axles are too wide. So the rim is too wide, the axles are too wide, and it has no axle assembly and no ferrules. It's a complete fake. A fake that Ron Wyatt planted. Again, to lead his marks along.
He's a deceiver.
He's a deceiver.
Okay. So just to ask one question, do we expect to find something in Red Sea?
No. No, we wouldn't expect to find anything in the Red Sea. Mm-hmm. Even if we find the correct site of the Exodus crossing. And there's several reasons. First, it's if the site is in the northwest Sinai, that place was infested by crocodiles. Okay. Okay. It was infested with crocodiles. Okay. They're going to eat the horses. They're going to eat the people. Okay.
Yeah. That makes
chariots
sense.
Chariots are also made of ephemeral materials. They're meant to be light. You look at, say, the chariot of Yuya from the period of Imhotep III. This is a royal chariot. This was a chariot that Imhotep III gave his father-in-law as a present. Okay, so it's some of the finest chariots ever made. It only has very, very small pieces of gold on it. Very small. It's mostly made of leather and wood. And that's because you wanted chariots to be light. Because what happens if you get your chariot stuck in the sand? Mm-hmm. You have to be able to lift it out and get back riding. So chariots were designed to be really, really light vehicles. So they're mostly leather and wood. These are things that decay, particularly leather. It's all strapped together with leather. So as soon as leather comes in contact with water, whether it's salt or fresh water, it falls apart. It gets eaten by snails. It's edibles. It's animal material. So it will fall apart very fast. Mm-hmm. And none of this stuff was fully covered in gold. None of it. Like, for example, what's again, another thing that marks this particular chariot wheel as a forgery is the fact that it's got gold on the tread. We're expected to believe that this chariot wheel rode across the Sinai and didn't lose its gold tread because gold is soft. Okay.
Mhm.
We're expected to believe that. It's got a perfectly intact tread after hundreds of miles of crossing the Sinai against an abrasive surface. Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay. Can I ask you one question which is similar to this about Sinai Peninsula? Do we expect to find anything from people, tents, and something? Many who oppose Exodus say that we should find something. Do you think like that, or?
No, I don't expect we would find much of anything in the Sinai. First of all, the Israelites were nomadic people.
Mhm.
Okay, they were nomadic people. Second of all, the Sinai is an awfully big place. It's a really big place. There's been some ground surveys of certain regions of the Sinai, but nothing very thorough. The third thing is there are still people living in the Sinai today. Bedouin live in the Sinai, and we find almost no traces of the Bedouin. Now, we do find some Bedouin sites, but those are sites that have been revisited over hundreds and thousands of years.
Mhm.
So there's time there for the evidence to accumulate. But a Bedouin camp, no, you don't find anything. I mean, I mean, what did the Israelites eat? Well, okay. The Israelites would eat, say, manna. That's not going to leave any traces. They ate quail. Bird bones are very fragile. The chance of you finding a bird fossil is just extraordinarily rare. Maybe lamb, sheep, but how are you going to tell that from other Bedouin who eat lamb and sheep?
Mhm.
So even if you found some remains, how are you going to tell the difference? The other issue too was during the late Bronze Age, uh, the Sinai was a savanna. It wasn't a desert. And
Mhm.
because it was a savanna, it had grasslands, it had occasional rains, it had trees, acacia, olive trees, almond trees, and insects.
Mhm.
And insects will also are basically nature's cleaning crew. So you're not going to get the same preservation in a savanna that you're going to get in a desert. So by the time the Israelites have left the Sinai, there's probably not going to be much left there. They're not going to be making pottery out there. They'll probably trade for it, but they won't make it because there's not a lot of clay beds out there. So, we just got to be realistic about the what the evidence is going to look like for just a 40-year migratory group. We do find some agricultural settlement at Kadesh Barnea, where the Israelites were said to periodically go back. But that's also been subject to severe rain erosion as well. So even that is not particularly hopeful.
Mhm.
So as far as their wandering years, it's going to be very, very difficult. And plus, the fact is too that the number of Israelites have probably been um, exaggerated in the biblical text for genre purposes. So their actual numbers are probably more in the 50,000s, not in the millions.
Yeah.
So even so, that too is going to affect what we find.
Okay, we can get back to our discussion about Ron Wyatt. We can just see.
This
Okay, you can comment.
okay, you can go to the next one too. You can go to the next one too.
Okay.
This is pareidolia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, pareidolia is when you look up in the sky and you see a puppy in the clouds. There's not a real puppy. These are not real chariot wheels. These are people seeing what their imagination fills in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The fact is, as soon as that carriage rots away, that first wheel is going to come crashing down in a second. Because the first thing that's going to go on that chariot is the leather straps that hold it all together.
Yeah.
And once those straps go, that chariot wheel is falling to the other. There's going to be no chance that it's going to form coralline algae, let alone coral. If you've ever owned a fish tank, a saltwater fish tank, and I have, you know that when you add your rock, you needed to first form coralline algae. The coralline algae creates the right biotome for coral to settle on. Coral just doesn't settle on any old thing. It has to form the coralline algae first, and then the coral on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, there is no way that this is going to survive. The leather straps are going to survive long enough for this to form coralline algae, let alone coral.
Yeah, this is crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts. Again, pareidolia.
Yeah.
It's all pareidolia. I don't even know what that picture on the middle right is supposed to be.
Me too. Sorry.
What is that? I mean, that's not it's not a chariot carriage. And even if it was, it'd be gone because it's all supposed to be leather. So this is just, this is all imagination.
Yeah.
Wishful thinking.
This reminds me on some house or boat or.
Yeah, I don't get it. I honestly don't get it.
Me too.
But that's what this is. This is pareidolia.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is also so.
Oh, is it? those are chariot wheels, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see it. even with my wild imagination, I don't see it.
Ooh. Okay, let's go. So are those the remains of the pharaoh's army and horses?
Oh boy. Ah. I mean, you're going to find bones all over the place. You're just going to find them all over the place. And the fact is, Sinai, because it was a savanna in the late Bronze Age, had herds of wild horses. There were wild horses in the ancient Near East. And Egypt had wild horses. Sinai had wild horses. You might have even had some domestic horses that got away. So just because you find a horse skeleton out in the desert just means it died out in the desert. As far as the femurs, well, you know what? Anyone can kill a body and dump it in the ocean.
Okay.
Not that that's ever happened before.
Yeah. Okay, but this is the best. You cannot disclaim this. Well, this is Solomon's large stone pillar, very high and weighing 11 tons and made of granite that is not found anywhere nearby.
Maybe it isn't, although all those mountains are granite. So I'm kind of doubt that claim. But there's two issues here that I think that are very important. First, there's no record of Solomon building a pillar here. This is not found in the Bible. This is not found in the Bible at all. It's not found in the Bible in the slightest. Okay. Second of all, this is a perfect example of a Roman Doric column. Okay, it's got that rim at the top. This is Doric or maybe Tuscanic, and this is the problem with this particular column is its dates to the Roman period or later. So yeah, it's Roman. So, and frankly, Romans built columns all over the place. You know, if they found a site that maybe they wanted to put up a villa, you know, a rich guy could ship it in a column. You know, that's wouldn't be difficult to do. You know, have it built in Egypt and sail it in by boat. You know, so we don't know because this is a column that's basically divorced from an archaeological context. We don't know where it comes from. We don't know. There's no textual evidence to support it. It's just a loose find somewhere. And to me, it looks Roman. So I would highly um, estimate my best estimate just from the style of the column is it's Roman. It's got no inscriptions on it either. It's like finding a rock in the desert. It doesn't tell you anything.
Yeah.
There's no context. It was found on the surface. There's no other ruins, at least as far as we've been told. There's no context. Because there's no context, the best we can do is judge it by its style.
Mm-hmm.
And its style is Roman or later.
Oh. Okay. They say that Solomon picked up granite with boats, and he made this remembrance for Exodus, I believe, or crossing the Red Sea or something.
Yeah, that's the story. And here's what I think is so disingenuous about this.
Okay.
They're taking a random rock and shoehorning it into the story.
Yeah.
They're making the evidence fit the story, not interpreting the story by the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So they're basically, I mean, this is no different than the treasure hunters of the 19th century who would just find something random and say, "Oh, I found the Holy Grail." It's the same deal. It's the same deal where they've got a good story and they're knitting this random chunk of stone to the story. It's not a true story, though. The story is true, but the story they're telling about how the evidence relates to the historical account isn't true.
Thank you. Next question.
Okay, is this your slide here or is this their slide?
Theirs. I just right. So
okay. So then I feel okay about this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first thing is it's not William Wiston.
Mm-hmm.
It's William Wiston.
Mm-hmm.
Wiston.
Okay.
Okay. So if this is their slide, they spelled his name wrong.
I cannot find. So maybe I was wrong.
This one's easy to look up. Just look up. Just look this. This one's easy to look up. Just put the dates into Google and William Wiston here, and you will find it's not Winston, it's Wiston.
Yeah.
Okay. It's very easy to. This is very easy to fact check.
Oh, this is their mistake. They said William Winston with N.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah. So that's the name's wrong. The name's wrong. They got the wrong name.
Yeah.
Okay. The second of all, Wiston never went to the ancient Near East. He never traveled there. So he has no way of knowing that a split rock still stands in its place.
Oh.
Okay. So he is making assumptions here that are not supported by the text. Okay. And that he has no first eyewitness basis to, or even documentary evidence for this. So, this is just something, this is hearsay. It's hearsay. Next.
Okay. Thank you.
Because let's get to the split rock.
Yeah, is this rock Horeb or something?
All right. Numbers 20:11 says that Moses struck the rock and water came out.
Mm-hmm.
It does not, the text does not say anywhere that the rock was split.
Oh.
This is eisegesis.
Mm.
Reading in what you want into the text, not reading out of the text. Now, you go to the Sinai, you find a lot of strange rocks. There's strange rocks all over that area. Okay? You're going to find strange rocks all over the place. There's no evidence that this particular rock was ever a spring. It's clear that what Moses exposed was a spring. Now, a spring is a particular geologic formation. You basically need it occurs in sedimentary mountains. Okay, so you don't get springs out of volcanic mountains. You get geysers and hot springs, but you don't get, say, springs that are appropriate for drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, at least not the ones that gush out like that. Those sort of springs happen because there's a layer of slate between other layers of rock. And what happens is rain falls on the mountain, trickles down to the rock till it hits the slate, and the slate provides a impenetrable barrier. And the water travels along that slate layer until it hits the side of the mountain and then starts gushing out. That's how natural springs are made. And there is just, I mean, frankly, if this was a volcanic spring, it would scald everyone that would just come out. I mean, just. So there's no chance this is a volcanic spring. We would also find a lot of sulfur in the area because all volcanic areas contain lots of sulfur and the water would stink.
Oh my God, this is insane.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
There's no evidence of a natural spring anywhere here. There's no slate. There's just no spring.
Mm-hmm.
This is pure fantasy.
Yeah.
This is fantasy.
Okay.
Okay.
We go next. Nearby Rock Horeb, we find some altar. So we expect that according to the text. So how you say about this?
Oh boy. This is no altar in the ancient Near East ever looked like this. Okay. We have altars going all the way back to the Egyptian Old Kingdom, around at least as old as 2600 BC.
Mm-hmm.
No altar ever looked like this ever. What this probably was an animal corral. Basically, a pen where you lined up your animals. So it's probably a corral. It's not an altar. No, as I said, no altar in the ancient Near East ever looked like this. And the fact is, if it was an altar, you'd be able to find bone remains in there, like ash, ash and bone. And you don't find that there. It's just a filled-in corral. That's all it is.
Yeah, like on Mount Ebala, I believe.
Yeah, at Mount Ebal, you in the altar sites there, you find ash and animal bones.
Yeah.
Yeah, graphic remains, basically bone remains, charred bones, and that's what you find at bird altar sites. You know, even in sites where there's, say, other types of offerings being done, you're still going to find ash because that's what they did, is they burnt those offerings.
Mm-hmm.
This is not an altar. This is a filled-in cattle pen.
Yeah, nice. And this is golden, I believe, silver bullet. This real Mount Sinai.
Real Mount Sinai. Oh boy. No, it's not the real Mount Sinai. We've already gone over why, according to the Bible, it's not the real Mount Sinai. But there's other reasons too why their claims don't sort of work out here. Okay. Like, for example, the black, what they call charring is actually called desert varnish. It's when sand is picked up and basically polishes the surface of hard minerals to create a darkened image.
I don't have that. Okay.
Okay. So there's a lot here that's I mean, you see desert varnish all over the ancient Near East if you've been to enough sites. Okay. You know, when I do my live streams, you know how the sort of the template I use, that was a photograph I took of a tomb. And you'll notice it's really shiny. It's a shiny brown color.
Mm-hmm.
That's desert varnish that had been applied to limestone. It's very smooth, it's very shiny, and it changes the color of the stone. So the quote charring here on Jebel Al-Lawz is actually desert varnish. And actually, you see touches on that desert varnish on that split stone too. So one of the faces is very much affected by desert varnish.
Mm-hmm. This makes perfect sense. Next, at the foot of this mountain were found the remains of a millstone that was used to grind weight. This form of millstone was found only in Egypt.
Lots of forms of millstones are found in Egypt. You know, people used various millstones of various types.
Mm-hmm.
Then they've been using them since the early Bronze Age. And even before then, we even find millstones in the Neolithic period.
Oh.
This is not evidence of anything.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we can skip this. This is silly. And
these are animal pens. We find them all over the ancient Near East. The fact is, most of the animals that were raised did not have to jump high, weren't high jumpers.
Mm-hmm.
So all you needed was a shallow stone pen to keep them corralled. We find them all over the place. We find them in Israel. We find them in Egypt. They're all over the place.
So this cannot be tents, right?
No. Tents would never be. You would never do this. You build a tent like this. This is nuts. You would use a tent peg to secure your tent. This is why, say, Bedouin wanted, basically, when they put up their tents, they put them in deep sand. And it looks like there's more than enough sand there to secure a tent. So you'd basically put up your tent and drive the pegs into the sand to secure it. Mm-hmm. Now, this is ridiculous. This is fantasy. No tent was ever built like this.
Okay.
It's not even practical. Can you imagine having to wander everywhere and build a stone circle just to put up a tent? I mean, this is loony.
I agree. Let's go next. Is this boundary around the mountain that Moses built around the mountain?
Okay, well, let's talk about this, because this is I don't see a boundary here, honestly.
Me too. Oh my God.
I see a discoloration in the soil. How does that make a boundary? I don't get that. As far as the footprint there, these petroglyphs have an uncertain pedigree anyway. They were never reported until the 1980s. So some of this could have been the result of tourists coming and forging them. Some of them might be original. It's hard to say because they're so badly documented. The other issue, too, is that Moses and many Israelites had the ability to write. They could write in early alphabetic scripts. We don't find any early alphabetic scripts at Jebel Al-Lawz, of all places, even though the Israelites had the ability to write. At least many of them did. You know, the craftsmen certainly did. Those who were scribes certainly did. Moses and his leadership certainly did. Priests would have had the Aaronic priests, and even the Egyptian priests that came with them would have had the ability to read and write. So there is a lot of secondary evidence of the Israelites, even at this time, being able to read and write, at least a good number of them. So it's very, very strange that all you have here is a footprint, and that's supposed to be a sign of a boundary. Egyptians made boundary stela. They had boundary stela, and they were highly ornate and highly complicated. There was no footprints on those boundary stela, by the way. They were just text message warnings. You were expected to read it. Mm-hmm. So this to me is not evidence of a boundary stela or a boundary marker of any kind. And also, we're not the text tells us that Moses prescribed a boundary. He didn't actually make the boundary. Oh. God told Moses, don't have anyone set foot on the base of the mountain. So that was basically a command not to set foot on the mountain. It wasn't there, but there's no marker there for that. You don't need a marker for that. The mountain provides that for you. Again, it's reading into the text.
Thank you. Next, this is altar under the mountain.
Yeah, it doesn't look like an altar to me again. More so from the next slide, actually, to be honest. Again, that looks like a cattle corral. That's the altar we saw before. You basically have a long corral there to hold your cattle. Mm-hmm. So no altar in the ancient Near East looked like this.
Okay, maybe it's not altar, but maybe it's for Israelites' cattle or anything.
Well, the problem is Israelites weren't cattle herders. They were sheep herders and goat herders. Mm-hmm. They're sheep and they had some oxen. But they were primary goat and sheep herders. And that's because by the time of the late Bronze Age, the savanna ecology no longer could support large numbers of cattle. Mm-hmm. Now, during the late Bronze Age, there were many cattle was, say, the primary herd that was used by the Shasu and the Midianites. So in the Middle Bronze Age, you had a lot more oases in, say, the Sinai where you could herd cattle. So we got to keep that in mind as we look at some of this stuff here, that a lot of what we're seeing here is cattle dependent. And because it's cattle dependent, it really can't be dated to the late Bronze Age, which is where we should find the Exodus, according to the biblical records. All of this stuff looks more Middle Bronze, to be honest. Because, again, the Shasu and the Midianites, they're herding cattle during the Middle Bronze Age. We even have Egyptian records of them moving their cattle across the Sinai to some of the oases that they found that existed in the Western Sinai. But by the late Bronze Age, almost all those tribes had converted to sheep because sheep require less water and less silage. Sheep and goats. sheep and goats.
Mm-hmm.
They were no longer primary cattle raisers. They were primarily a sheep and goat culture, a caprid culture. This is one of the things that really annoyed, say, the Egyptians. It's why the Egyptians hated Semites, is because they raised sheep and goats. And sheep and goats polluted waterways.
Mm-hmm.
And the Egyptians were highly dependent on clean waterways to make the water safe further up the canals. This is also why they hated pig farmers, because pig farmers are gross polluters. Sheep aren't much better. Sheep and goats aren't much better. Not as bad as pigs by any stretch, but they're still worse than, say, cattle. Cattle are very easy on waterways. They're very clean on waterways.
Mm-hmm.
But by the late Bronze Age, almost all the wandering tribes are, at that point, raising sheep and goats, just because they require less silage and less water.
This is interesting. Thank you. So this is not from Israelites.
No, it's probably not from the Israelites. I think that's a safe guess anyway by this point.
Okay. How do you respond on this? This is 12 pillars for 12 tribes of Israel, but only 10 remain. So
random rocks don't a pillar make. I mean, you find 10 rocks in the desert, you can't claim those are pillars. And that's what we have here is 10 random rocks. Yeah, so there's no evidence that any of these are pillars. Not at all.
Come on.
Come on.
You're destroying my fate.
I think this is one of the reasons why the Ron Wyatt fans vilify me too. Only because they put faith in a man.
Yeah.
They put faith in a man instead of in Christ. And the Bible. You know, put your faith in God's word and put your faith in Jesus Christ. Don't put your faith in pseudoscientific garbage, junk archaeology. And accept the fact that we are sinful and people do lie. And some people do lie fabulously. And Ron Wyatt was a fabulous liar. He was a compulsive liar.
Let's check this out. This is hard.
I see nothing. I see a white circle and a dot.
Yeah. Next slide. Okay, is this this is a real question. Is this Egyptian god Apis? I don't know, really.
Probably not.
Okay.
Okay, look. How do I say this? Cow worship, bovine worship in the ancient Near East, in the Fertile Crescent, all the way to, say, Sudan, was ubiquitous.
Mm-hmm.
It was absolutely everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You can't go anywhere in the ancient Near East and not find some form of bovine worship. It's absolutely everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Through all periods of history. You'll find it in the Neolithic period. You'll find it into the Roman period. You'll even find traces of it and even into the Christian period, to be honest. Okay. It is a ubiquitous, outstanding, and it's because of the relationship of cattle to mankind. I mean, look, cow worship is still done in India today.
Yeah.
And that's because of the relationship between cattle and agriculture. In fact, many have speculated that there would be almost no agriculture without the cow. Yes, there's other animals that can take its place, but the cow was the primary driver of agriculture. Mm-hmm. Its feces could be used as fertilizer, basically a clean fertilizer. You could put a plow on it and it will till the land. Its meat is among the most nutritious. You can use its skin for leather, mm-hmm. as a kind of a writing surface, vellum. You can use its horns for basically a variety of inlays and decorative purposes, as well as even musical instruments. It's an incredibly versatile animal that fills many, many functions. So its popularity in the ancient Near East was wherever they had enough water and silage, there were cows. And where there were cows, there was cow worship. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. So just because we have cows on petroglyphs here does not mean this is the god Apis. Now, we have to also understand, too, that there were several cow deities in Egypt as well.
Oh.
Apis isn't the only one. There was like a dozen of them. You had Meves. You had Hathor. There were others. You even in later periods, you had Serapis. Serapis is Osiris Apis, another cow deity. Cow deities were everywhere. You know, we go to Ashkelon, and at the dig at Ashkelon, they found two silver bulls, two silver calves. These are the famous, quote, golden calves of Ashkelon. They're really silver, but they were lauded in the news as the golden calves. You know, and these would have been the idols that they actually worshiped, these small silver idols. So you find this stuff all over the ancient Near East. It's everywhere. Okay, I'm done.
Can we
Rant
say
over?
Yeah. Can we say it's like sun worship, maybe? If we find sun worship and then we say, oh, it must be Egyptian god.
Yeah, it's kind of it's kind of like that. You find sun worship and then claim it's Egyptian, where the sun deities would have different manifestations all over. And even in Egypt, it had different manifestations. You know, like you had the Aten, you had Re, you had Atum Re, you had Amun Re. In Mesopotamia, you had Shemesh. You know, so you did have a variety of different manifestations of the sun deity, although it was never as ubiquitous as, say, bovine worship. Even in Egypt, the cult par excellence in Egypt, the most popular cult among all levels of society that had the most worshippers was Hathor, the cow goddess. So it's as I say, I'm being quite literal when I say bovine worship was everywhere.
Can I ask you just, do you know what was the real golden calf in Moses' time in Bible story?
Okay. The real golden calf was probably a very, very small statue. Very small. It could have been, given the rapidity that you did this in, they probably did this out of cold forged gold, which is basically they sort of smashed a bunch of gold together to make it. It was probably no bigger than about that size.
Oh,
that size, about that tile.
I didn't know that.
Most of the idols of the ancient world, the real ones, I'm not talking about the decorative ones that would be outside of, say, the temples, but the ones you find in like a Holy of Holies.
Mm-hmm.
The Holy of Holies in a temple are really small. They're less than 18 inches. They're less than 18 inches. And more typically, they're around 6 to 8 inches.
Mm-hmm. Why?
We do, because they're made out of precious metals. They're made out
Oh,
of precious metals.
okay.
So here's the thing: with a idol in the ancient world, and particularly in Egypt. In Egypt, there was a belief that the flesh and blood, the flesh of a god was made out of gold. Now, in the Levant, they would replace the gold with bronze. So they would make their idols out of bronze. But despite that, they still weren't very big. You can go to museums today and see, say, bronze idols of Baal, and they're tiny. They're really small. They're, as I said, they're less than 18 inches.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Do you know what deity was that in Exodus story about golden calf?
We don't know. I
Okay.
mean, it could be any generic deity. It was a male calf, so that would exclude Hathor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because Hathor is definitely female.
Okay.
Now we do know that some Semites did worship Hathor.
Mm-hmm.
The Semites, the miners that worked at Serebit al-Qadam, the mining colony on the West Sinai, they worship Hathor. But just because they worship Hathor does not mean the Israelites worship Hathor with the golden calf. Again, it's a male calf, so we're not sure. It could be just a generic bovine deity. Regardless, without, say, Moses there, the Israelites just fell back into default worship, which is a cow god, a bull deity.
Yeah. Could it be Apis? Maybe.
Possibly,
Possible.
possible.
Okay.
But again, we don't have the evidence.
Yeah,
That'd
but
be reading into the text. That'd be eisegesis.
mm,
We're not sure. We can't be sure. Again, there are many, many cow deities running around the landscape.
yeah.
So we would be doing that would be a conjecture. That'd be conjecture, and I don't like conjectures.
Okay, that's honest.
These are models. These are Egyptian models.
Mm-hmm.
These are Egyptian models. Uh, some of these are deities, some of them aren't.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, most of these are not. Now, the one on it's hard to know which ones are which here because um, there you got the head of an Apis bull, or I think it was a Mevis bull mummy in the middle at the bottom there, the one with the triangle on the forehead.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Uh, but a lot of these are just basically models that are stuck in tombs.
Mm-hmm. All right.
This is, I mean, that was just cow husbandry, checking to see if they're fat. So that's what they're doing. They're checking to see the condition of the animal.
Next, around wheels that were once used by the Israelites.
Oh boy. Not all circles in the sands are wells. But let's say they are wells. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Who's to say they were dug by Israelites?
Yeah.
Didn't the Midianites have wells? Didn't the Midianites have a well when Moses came upon it in Exodus 2:15? When Moses went to the land of Midian and met the daughters of Jethro, he met them at the well
Yeah.
in Midian. Midianites had wells too. Just because you have a well does not mean it was dug by Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
So even if these are wells, and I'm not saying they are, because not all circles in the sand are wells. It doesn't mean they were dug by Israelites.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a paucity of evidence here. This is all circumstantial, even and it's only circumstantial because you have to ignore the counterfactuals. The counterfactuals are that the Bible prohibits the Mount Sinai being at Jebel Al-Lawz, and the Red Sea being the Reed Sea, Yam Suf of the Bible. The evidence is all against it. Yeah. So even if they have this circumstantial evidence, it doesn't really count for anything because it's been denied by the stronger biblical evidence.
Yes, thank you. This is another picture. Okay, you talked about this a little, so can you just briefly?
Yes, we're seeing here that desert varnish on the mountains. But what I want to focus on here is that rock.
Okay.
That rock sample, because that rock sample is fascinating to me. What we see here is not obsidian. It's not obsidian. It's not obsidian. Okay. Now, it's not the clearest picture, but it's clear enough that we can tell what it is. Okay. Obsidian is volcanic glass. Okay. This means when it cleaves like glass. That means when it breaks, it leaves sharp edges and striations. Obsidian also has a very high gloss, so it's highly reflective, and it's deep black. You look at pictures of obsidian on any picture on Google of obsidian virtually, except for the rainbow stuff, but that's not the same stuff. You see dark black stone with reflective fangs on it, just because it's so shiny. Any light that you shine on obsidian will reflect off of it because it's glass, and when it breaks, it leaves a reflective surface. This is not obsidian, and you can tell because the edges are sort of beveled. It's not a sharp, they're not sharp edges. You can see there's wear there. There's no striations in the fractures, and it's not highly reflective. What we have here is gray flint. It's gray flint, sometimes called chert. And gray flint is found all over from Egypt to Saudi Arabia. It's all over the place. It's not volcanic glass. This is not volcanic glass. It's gray flint.
Okay. So, do you agree that this doesn't prove that God manifested himself on a mountain and stuff?
Well, this doesn't prove or disprove it. This is nothing at all.
Yeah.
I mean, you got desert varnish here on essentially granite mountains. These aren't even volcanic mountains. These aren't even volcanic mountains. They're just granite mountains that have received some varnish. That's it.
Okay, should we expect on real Mount Sinai to find something black or something that burned or?
No.
Okay.
Because we don't know the nature of the fire that descended from God. You know, when God came down onto the mountain, we don't know how long it lasted. We don't know how much heat it produced. We don't know if it was what kind of fire it was, because combustion fires aren't the only kind of fires. You know, you have reduction fires too. You know, reduction fires don't leave much in the way of ash. You know, an oxygen-rich fire does not leave much ash. It consumes it. So we wouldn't expect to see charring from that. What if it was, say, a plasma fire? You know, that's going to leave a different kind of evidence, if any at all. So, we don't know the nature of that.
Mhm.
So the Bible doesn't give us here enough evidence to say what to expect. So again, we have to go according to the evidence.
Yeah. Again, imagination. So
Imagination running wild.
this is the best argument. Are you ready? The area is
Oh,
acoustic.
my response to this is so what?
Best answer.
So what? You can find good acoustics everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Go to the Swiss Alps. You'll find great acoustics. Yeah, so what?
Yeah. Okay, next. I believe this is last, probably. There is an acacia tree nearby.
So what? Again, in the late Bronze Age, there were acacia trees all over from Egypt all the way across the Sinai, you know, into Saudi Arabia, down into Africa. Africa still has acacia trees.
Yeah.
There are no more acacia trees, at least not many in Egypt. Sinai doesn't have any more because it's now a complete desert.
Mm-hmm.
But Sinai used to have a lot of acacia trees. The fact is, the site of Serbit El Khadim was not just a turquoise mining site, it was also a smelting site for bronze ore or
Mm-hmm.
copper ore. So, what they would do is they would mine, say, the turquoise, keep the best turquoise, and take the rest of the copper ore and smelt it down to bronze.
Mm-hmm.
They would source local trees to make those fires. And today, you go to Serbit El Khadim, there are huge slag pits all over the area. So they were there at one time must have been a lot of trees in the Sinai for them to produce that much ore. And among those would have been the acacia.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is that the Israelites, when they went out to Mount Sinai, they would have had to source local acacia to build the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, the altar of burnt offering, the the offering table, the incense altar. These are all things that they sourced out of acacia wood that would have been local.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And this is last, of course.
Is that a bathtub in the middle of the desert?
I don't know.
That looks like an abandoned bathtub or a washing machine.
Okay, don't ask, please. um, I'm gonna read what Dr. Lennart Möller said. He said, following these revelations, the Saudi Arabian authorities cordoned off the region, set up a police checkpoint, and armed police guards. So, how do you comment about that? Maybe they find that Ron Wyatt and Miller found evidence for Exodus, so they put police after that.
That whole area has been a military base since the 1950s.
Oh.
Okay. Okay. It's been a military base since the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
Ron Wyatt was arrested by the Saudi authorities for 7 days for basically unauthorized entry and base. I mean, he crossed the Red Sea without going through not the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aqaba, without going through a proper port of entry and without getting permission from the Saudi government to enter a military base. So when they arrested Wyatt, they thought he was a spy.
Well,
They released him when they found out he was kind of more of an, how do I say this? An idiot? Okay. If he was smart, I mean, if he was really smart and articulate, they would have said, okay, maybe he was a spy. You're looking for Mount Sinai. Here. We're just going to release you quietly. But so, yeah, it's been a military base since the 1950s.
Yeah.
They do military exercises out there. So, and not all military bases have, say, military installations. Like, for example, you look at, say, the Nevada test range in the United States. It's huge. It is absolutely a massive site. It takes up like 30% of the state, something like that. It's big. Yeah. So you go out to the Nevada test range and you don't see much as far as military sites. But make no mistake about it, if you go over the barbed wire fence, you'll get arrested. You're not supposed to be out there. Ron Wyatt, it wasn't supposed to be out there because it's a military base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he's a more recognized like spy than archaeologist.
Yeah. He got arrested for being a spy. Under suspicion of being a spy. But again, they let him go.
Maybe now, they shouldn't do that. Okay.
Now, Lennart Möller. Let's talk a little bit about him.
Yeah, okay.
Because he's one of the guys that's keeping this stuff alive.
Yeah.
He is not an archaeologist. He has no training in archaeology, Egyptology, or any ancient Near Eastern specialist. He is not a biblical scholar. He is a dilettante. Oh. His doctorate is in environmental medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Basically, how the environment affects your health. That's his PhD. That's his training. That's what he teaches at the Karolinska Institute. The Karolinska Institute has not endorsed any of Möller's archaeological work in any way, shape, or form. He's on staff as basically, as I said, a guy who does environmental medicine.
Mm-hmm. So what's about him? Because he don't give up about this. He don't quit, and he, I believe, is recording some pattern of evidence or stuff about Jebel Al-Lawz. So.
Oh no, not again! Not the patterns of evidence again.
Mm.
The patterns of evidence, it has a formula. It has a formula. You basically, when the patterns of evidence movie is made, they take a fringe scholar
mm-hmm.
or somebody who has fringe ideas, and they basically lionize him and stack him against a group of scholars that have been cherry picked,
mm-hmm.
and they're quote mining those scholars. So they basically take the barest sound bites they can out of those scholars. And then they present this to the public and say, well, take those sound bites or this lionized scholar, that's this fringe lionized scholar, choose one.
Mm-hmm.
It's a formula. Those movies are a formula. And it's a formula of choosing. It's kind of trying to solve, in some respects, the cereal aisle problem. It's like when you take a kid to the grocery store and you say to the child, okay, choose some cereal. And the kid sees 1,000 choices and can't choose. He's got choice paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
There's too many options. So mommy picks 2 off the shelf. the sugary one and the healthy granola one, and then says to the kid, choose. The kid goes, I'll take the sugary one. That's patterns of evidence in a nutshell. It's taking all the options, reducing it to two choices, one that's healthy, one that's not, and asking you to choose. Most people are going to pick the one that's more sensational, the one that scratches the itch of easy thinking.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have presentation about this, but can you please comment about connections between Joseph and Imhotep? They both lived 110 years, and maybe some similarities. So, can you comment that?
They're not the same, I'll say that. They differ by about 1,000 years. Okay. Imhotep lived around 2600 BC. He was the architect of King Zoser. He was his vizier, and he was the first high priest of Heliopolis. He was later deified as god of medicine. And he was considered to be one of the wisest men in all of Egypt's history. Okay. Any wise man was said to have lived 110 years. This is the sort of the canonical age that, say, wise men were said to live. So it wasn't just something that was applied to Imhotep or even Joseph, but several individuals through Egypt's history were said to have lived 110. And it's a symbolic age. They didn't actually live that long. They were just ascribed that because of the great wisdom. So, Joseph is going to be described in the same way because he was seen as so wise. Joseph arrives around the scene a little after 1666 BC, a little after the beginning of the 15th dynasty, and he helps the Hyksos establish themselves as rulers over the Nile Delta and all the way down south to Thebes. So I don't have any, unless you have any more questions. That's about this. That's the summary there.
Yeah, just one, if you can, about 7 years of famine. I believe it's mentioned by Pharaoh Djoser, or how you say?
Djoser, yeah. Now we have to keep in mind certain things about that inscription that are hinky. Okay.
Okay.
That's not an inscription by Djoser.
Okay.
Okay. That was an inscription written during the Ptolemaic period. So this is when the Greeks had already taken over Egypt, just before the Romans. So it's 2,000 years after the said events. It's also a political stela. Now, the politics behind that is that the island of Elephantine wanted to be independent from the Ptolemies who lived in Alexandria, very far to the north. And basically, the guys at Elephantine said, okay, well, we seem to recall this famine, and, the north didn't help, and we were self-sufficient under Djoser. So because we were self-sufficient under Djoser, we don't need you now. Well, the fact is, Djoser never ruled from Elephantine. He ruled from Memphis. That's a lot closer to Alexandria than Elephantine.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a political stela. There's no actual record that famine existed. Not at the time of Djoser. Now, there were lots of famines in Egypt. Lots of them. And they did occur on a regular basis. And that's because the rains in East Africa that supply the Nile are so inconsistent. High levels of rain in East Africa meant high floods, which meant bumper crops. Low rains meant drought. Drought meant famine. So famines were actually fairly common in Egypt. In fact, they occur so often that we really can't peg down which one belonged to Joseph.
Mhm. Thank you. Okay, that's all of questions. Can you end this with some message? I like what you said about Ron Wyatt and the inspiration, how God revealed him in dreams. At least he believed that. But this is wrong, and you explained that God work in different way by studying and examining. And can you briefly comment that?
Sure. I mean, Ron Wyatt claimed to have received angelic revelations.
Yeah.
He claimed to have received prophecies of the future. He claimed to have received a different gospel, which is a gospel that depends on good works and following the law. This is a gospel that is antithetical to the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is salvation by grace through faith,
Yeah.
not by adherence to the law. Okay. The law is a school teacher, but it does not save.
Mhm.
It brings death, according to Galatians and according to Romans. You'll never be saved by the law. God does work in our lives, though. He works in our lives through preparing our experiences, basically what happens in our life, how we were raised, what we read, what we ingest, our interactions with other people, and through God's word, the Bible. And anytime we start superseding God's word with stories, we are going to end in trouble because we are replacing the truth that will never change with a story that can change tomorrow, the next day, 10 days down the road, 10 years down the road. When the evidence comes up and shows those stories false, it opens the Bible and Christianity to ridicule. Because the problem is, people can't tell the difference. They conflate the truth of the Bible with the story. This is one of the reasons why it's so important that when we do tell stories, they have to be true stories.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.
That's all. So thank you for your time. This was wonderful. I enjoyed and learned much. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for watching. So see you next time.